We've been ahead in polls for 2 years now, and we have many political parties that are lacking any compass, any captain. You'll have tons of people saying all sorts of things. On the Parti Québécois, we seem to be an obsessive subject for many politicians. And listen to my speech yesterday, that's precisely what I said. I have to restate, we're committed to the best interest of Quebecers, and I think it's misleading to say that there's a referendum next week to create that impression. It's also misleading to say that going to vote is a threat for Quebec. I mean, it doesn't make sense. Look at what's happening in Alberta. So there are many things to be said in terms of inducing fear, and I'm fully aware that in the recent history of Quebec, inducing fear has been a technique to avoid debating the essential debate here. Can and should Quebec decide on its own?
Okay. James Mennie over at the Montreal Gazette. Jim, I'm listening to that. I'm hearing that for the first time. And my first reaction is, methinks that does protest too much. This idea of fear, he's not saying that a referendum is off the table. He's just saying, or correct me if I'm wrong, that it may not happen on day 1 or 2 of a PQ government if they win.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you've got that 100% right. But one of the reasons I asked our dear friend Brian to use that clip is that you hear him. This guy nailed the situation perfectly. I'm up against a bunch of people who are stepping on rakes and walking into walls, okay? They will try to scare you. They will try to say I'm the devil incarnate, that I'm going to blow up the country, but they've been saying this kind of thing for decades. And the other thing that I find fascinating in all of this, though, is please don't look at this as saying, well, is he going to hold a referendum? Is he backing off? I have literally been saying on this show for years that the closer we got to an election, that the PQ would find reasons, maybe we shouldn't hold a referendum right away, maybe we're going to, because it's a PQ tradition. Separation is really sweet, but power is even better. And the fact is, he's admitting, people are telling me in Chicoutimi, which are, apparently is PQ territory, that they're worried about the prospect of a referendum. Believe me, he's not stupid. He wants to win. He wants to be the next premier of Quebec. And quite frankly, I have to say I admire his candor by saying that the people I'm up against right now don't have a clue of what they're doing. He's 1,000% right. But once again, folks, stay tuned. The closer we get to voting day, if those numbers don't budge on sovereignty, he will find any number of reasons to say, well, maybe in the second part of the mandate, we've got to go. There's a lot of economic uncertainty. It'll depend on Trump. And even if it depends on the midterms, there's no guarantee the U.S. will ever get better. So you know what? This is all very, very convenient for the PQ. He's playing his hand. He doesn't really have that many cards in his hand, Aaron, but he's playing it very, very well. And quite frankly, when you look at the performance of the people he's up against, I can't argue with this guy.
No.
Go ahead.
No, you're right. I mean, you can't argue with that assessment, right? They are without a compass, rudderless, whatever else. I understand all that. But Jim, if this is about polls and the fact that sovereignty or support for it is low, and we had another poll showing it's even lower, it's been that way forever. It's been that way for the last 30 years. So why all of a sudden take on this idea of, you know what, the polls are not very good for us, so I'm going to adopt this position now?
Well, the PQ, as I said, the PQ has always done this. And plus, if nothing else, in the past 8 years, the CAQ has shown that even though they pretend they're not separatists, if they walk and talk and quack like separatists and scream like separatists and complain like separatists, guess what? Ottawa listens and gives them not just what they asked for, but even more than what they asked for. So the idea that, Monsieur Saint-Pierre Plamondon is turning around and calmly saying that, you know what, this is the situation, this is what we're going to look at, no one's going to be able to go after him. I think if we should be concerned right now, Aaron, is when the newly minted head of the Quebec Liberal Party turns around and points out that even though the candidate in the Chicoutimi by-election couldn't break 10%, and remember, the regions are supposed to be the target for the Liberals. They couldn't break 10%, but you know what, Aaron? Apparently the news is so good because in the 2022 general election, the Liberals only got 3%. So I guess using that logic, if in the next general election the Liberals only win 40 seats, and as opposed to the majority they need in the 125-seat legislature, I guess that'll be a huge triumph for the Quebec Liberal Party. I got to tell you, Charles Milliard had better smarten up. Charles Milliard, I think, like a lot of Quebec Liberals, thinks that this province is going to wait for them to put their heads on straight. They're not. And what we saw last night as well in Chicoutimi was, and I don't think it was a huge showing, it was an interesting showing by the Quebec Conservative Party that they did not embarrass themselves. They were fairly behind the PQ winner, but it was a decent number two. They were about a couple of thousand votes, but still, pound for pound, they held their own. But the idea that the so-called official opposition in Quebec is doing that terribly, and then turns around and they spin this, well, it's good news because we did even worse before. No. That's not what people want to hear, and I really hope that they get their act together sooner rather than later, because the very fact that in this segment, you and I have spent infinitely more time talking about a guy who now has, 7 seats in the National Assembly as opposed to the official opposition, is in and of itself kind of scary.
You're right. And we've been saying this. Certainly this has been the talk about Charles Milliard for a while. I'm using the analogy now because, again, to your point, 9% of the vote in Chicoutimi, a bit kind of embarrassing. Maybe that's not the right word to use. It's like it's like in the sports analogy, Jim, he keeps taking pitch after pitch after pitch and not swinging at anything. And at some point, you better swing at something because that's not going to get you on base.
If nothing else, then to give the impression that you're part of the game, that you're paying attention to the game. Because right now, I'm not getting that impression at all. I'm very sorry. And he seems to be very, very cautious. I understand that the backstory may be there's still a lot of disgruntlement in the Liberal caucus over the whole Mauro Rizki business and the departure of Pablo Rodriguez. Here's the thing, buddy. You put in for the job. You're the leader. Lead. You lay down the law and you tell the caucus, if you don't like it, walk. I'll get new candidates in time for the next election, okay? But enough of this. And I think he's got to lay down the law and he's got to be able to speak freely, because if that is what's holding him back right now, he's not going to win. He's not even going to come close. And I don't think Quebec voters of any stripe have the patience to deal with the Quebec Liberal Party that once again doesn't seem to extend past the West Island of Montreal.
By the way, it's worth mentioning as well, and I know I brought it up a couple of times, but the election is scheduled for October, but there's nothing to prevent the CAQ from moving this up earlier. If Christine Saint-Fréchette wins, the more time Charles Milliard spends sitting on his hands and not saying anything, the more it works against the Liberals. So we'll leave it at that. I just want to let people know. Yeah,
but be careful because, as I mentioned yesterday, the biggest plurality of votes, the biggest margin of victory for the CAQ in the last general was in Chicoutimi, 14,000 votes. Man, they got whipped last night.
Okay. Your headline here says, "Welcome to Montreal, where a Potemkin village is the answer to 3 decades of dithering." What's this about?
People call it the Empress Theater. I will always, I think a lot of our listeners will always know it as Cinema 5. Have you seen the plan they unveiled, Aaron?
I did not.
Okay. For those of our listeners who don't know what a Potemkin village is, when the Russian Empress Catherine the Great was touring Crimea with Grigory Potemkin, who was one of her ministers, also apparently her lover, but he was a crook and he had been misusing funds. Anyway, all these squalid little villages that were supposed to be fixed up didn't get fixed up. So instead, he built fake, movie front of houses, okay? Right. And they were held up by stilts and all that, and she'd be going by on her carriage, what a quaint little village. And right behind it was this dreadful little squalid hole, okay? Now, here is the unveiling, the artist's conception for the Empress Theater. The Empress Theater will be a vacant lot because the building is so far gone, they can't do anything with it. They're going to scour it off the ends of the earth. But wait, Aaron, there's more. We're going to maintain the facade, hold it up with stilts, a la Potemkin, okay? And inside that vacant lot, we're going to make a little stage so people can have little shows. And they can show movies on the wall, the other wall that they'll put up. In other words, so it's a vacant lot with a fake facade in front. There you go. After 34 years of kicking this file around, this is the solution that we get, okay? So I have to tell you, I want to be positive in this story, and I want to do the city of Montreal a favor, rather than spend a few $100,000 talking to or having consultants come up with a name for this particular area. I think Le Parc d'Échec, Park of Failure, would be really, really good. Okay. There's also the Place de Procrastination, which I think needs no translation.
I like that.
And my personal favorite is the Carré des Propositions Ratées, the square of bungled propositions. Okay. But this is it. How perfectly Montreal. And no, I'm not laying this at the feet of this administration or the previous administration. It's been 34 years. God help us, folks. This is how they do things or don't do things in Montreal. And if you don't believe me, that the Empress, and it all seems to be theaters too, Aaron. The Empress is like Exhibit B. Exhibit A, of course, was the Seville Theater, which was a blight eyesore in downtown Montreal for years, until it literally, got knocked down and was replaced by a high-rise. But the bottom line here is this is always what happens in Montreal, and this is why people just get fed up with the entire concept of consultations and world-class and this and that. And in the end, what do you get? You get a vacant lot with some movie set flats on it.
Jim?
Yeah.
In a perfect world, right, and given the fact that it's been more than 30 years and we know how much it would have cost to knock this down and build it, what would you have done here?
Honestly, I would have knocked the damn thing down. If we're looking for housing, I'd put some kind of housing up there. This is ridiculous. This is really ridiculous. Okay. And if you can't find someone who can build housing there, I'm wondering how big the housing crisis actually is.
I wonder, too, if is there a contamination issue? I have no idea. It was just a theater sitting on the site.
There was a couple. It was a fire. Yeah. I remember it had decontaminated. There was a fire. There had been a fire. God knows what else was seeped in there over the 3 decades, right? I understand that. But here, the reason we're doing this now is because they probably can't do anything else other than this. But my God, what an embarrassment this is. And like I say, I'm a guy, skin in the game. I think a lot of our listeners, too, will always remember it as Cinema 5, that it was this center of gravity in the West End of Montreal, and we have watched this thing like an old friend on his deathbed for 3 decades, and then to see this happen, it really is a sad end.
Who was in power 35 years ago when this was the issue at the time?
92 was when it burned down. So what? We're talking maybe Pierre Bourque. I honestly can't tell you off the top of my head.
Be curious to know.
But you know what? There's plenty of credit, he said, making air quotes to go around. It's gone through a lot of administrations, buddy.
All right, Jim, thank you.
I'm Dylan Playfair.
And I'm Tyler Smith.
We're putting loneliness in the penalty box by talking to some of our favorite athletes about the importance of friendship.
This is Bromance.
Bromance is brought to you by Charm Diamond Centers, proudly Canadian-owned and operated. Charm has been part of your love stories and bromances for over 50 years.
And you can find Bromance on the iHeartRadio network or wherever you get your podcasts.